1950 to 1951, front engine era. The first Formula One seasons were basically pre-war racing wearing a new badge. Cars were front-engined, tall, heavy, and built more like artillery than precision tools. Drivers sat behind massive fuel tanks with thin tires that offered almost no grip, so races were won through bravery and mechanical sympathy. Reliability mattered more than speed. Simply finishing was an achievement. Teams like Alfa Romeo and Ferrari relied on supercharged monsters that overheated, leaked, and shook themselves apart. Strategy barely existed, and driver fitness was an afterthought. It was an era ruled by courage, experience, and who could wrestle a violent machine the longest. 1952 to 1953, F2-era Formula One briefly stepped sideways into Formula 2 regulations because proper F1 cars were too expensive after the war. Smaller engines meant less power but closer racing, and manufacturers had to think about balance instead of brute force. Ferrari dominated by building light, simple cars that rewarded smooth drivers like Ascari. These seasons proved that technology could shape competition more than heroics alone. It also introduced the idea that regulations could save the sport when grids looked thin. The F2 era was short, but it taught Formula One how to survive economically instead of just romantically. 1954 to 1958, front engine era part 2. True F1 returned with the more advanced front-engine machines, now sleeker and faster, but still fundamentally old-fashioned. Mercedes introduced science to the paddock with fuel injection and desmodromic valves, shocking rivals who still worked like blacksmiths. Fangio's dominance showed that driver intelligence could tame evolving technology. Safety was still non-existent, and fatal accidents shaped entire championships. By 1958, constructors finally received their own title, shifting attention from lone heroes to organized teams. The era ended with a feeling that the layout itself, engine in front, driver behind, was becoming a dead end. 1959 to 1967, classic mid-engine era. The Cooper revolution flipped Formula One on its head by putting the engine behind the driver. Suddenly, cars were lighter, better balanced, and able to corner instead of just slide. Lotus and Brabham refined the concept with space-frame chassis and clever aerodynamics. Drivers like Jim Clark exploited this agility with precise, flowing styles. Mechanical grip replaced brute horsepower as the main weapon. The sport also became more professional. Proper testing programs, dedicated race engineers, and the first hints of sponsorship. By the mid-60s, Formula One looked recognizably modern, built around handling rather than raw muscle. 1968 to 1977, Aero-era wings arrived and changed the language of speed. At first, teams bolted giant struts onto existing cars with almost no understanding, causing spectacular failures. Gradually, aerodynamics became a science, creating downforce that glued tires to the track. Sponsorship exploded after tobacco money entered, turning plain national colors into corporate billboards. Drivers had to adapt from elegant sliding to high-grip precision. Lotus pioneered monocoque design while Ferrari and McLaren industrialized operations. The era mixed creativity with danger. Faster cornering exposed how primitive circuits and safety standards still were. 1978 to 1982. Ground effect era Lotus discovered that the entire car could become a wing by shaping tunnels under the floor. Ground effect created insane cornering speeds and brutal physical loads on drivers. Teams copied the idea within months, and cars began to look like black rectangles scraping the asphalt. Ride height became religion. Even a few millimeters mattered. Drivers fought violent bouncing known as porpoising, while engineers chased ceiling skirts and stiffer suspensions. The racing was spectacular but unstable, and governing bodies struggled to control speeds that were rising faster than tires or circuits could handle. 1983 to 1988. Turbo-era turbos turned Formula One into a power war. Qualifying engines produced ridiculous four-figure horsepower, turning straights into rocket launchers and gearboxes into grenades. Fuel limits forced drivers to juggle boost settings like video games, balancing speed against simply reaching the flag. Manufacturers such as Honda, Renault, and BMW treated F1 as an engineering battlefield. The gap between works teams and privateers became enormous. Overtaking often depended on who dared run more boost. By 1988, the cars were faster than the sport could safely manage, setting the stage for a reset. 1988 to 1996, naturally aspirated era. Turbos were banned and Formula One returned to high-revving, naturally aspirated engines, bringing back throttle response and driver control. Electronics quietly took over. Active suspension, traction control, semi-automatic gearboxes. Cars became easier to drive at the limit, yet harder to understand. Aerodynamics grew more refined with sculpted barge boards and complex wings. Teams like Williams and Benetton built technological empires around software, as much as mechanics. This era produced some of the sport's fiercest rivalries because performance depended on integrating man and computer rather than just raw courage. 1997 to 2005, V10 era. The V10 years are remembered as Formula One's soundtrack. Engines screamed past 19,000 revolutions per minute while tyre wars between Bridgestone and Michelin created unpredictable performance swings. Aerodynamics became hyper-detailed, with flicks and chimneys covering every surface. Refueling turned races into strategic chess matches decided in pit lanes. Teams operated like aerospace companies and drivers trained like Olympic athletes. Schumacher's Ferrari dynasty showed how organization could dominate talent. The cars were brutally fast yet precise, rewarding aggressive driving styles and late-breaking heroes. 2006 to 2008, V8 era. A smaller V8 was introduced to slow things down, but engineers immediately clawed the speed back through aero. Reliability became near perfect, so championships were decided by tiny margins and tyre management. Electronic aids were gradually removed, forcing drivers to rediscover throttle control. McLaren and Ferrari traded blows while younger stars emerged from structured junior programs. The sport felt transitional, still loud and wild but preparing for environmental and economic pressures. These seasons proved that Formula One could change engine philosophy without losing its competitive edge. 2009 to 2013, hybrid V8 era curves and radical aero rules reset the grid. Double diffusers, blown exhausts, and DRS created some of the most complex cars ever seen. Overtaking aids changed how races were driven. Strategy sometimes mattered more than outright pace. Red Bull mastered the regulations with obsessive precision, showing that understanding loopholes was as important as horsepower. Tyres became intentionally fragile, forcing drivers to manage degradation lap by lap. The era mixed entertainment with controversy, a laboratory for ideas that would shape the future hybrid revolution. 2014 to 2021, hybrid V6 turbo era. The sport embraced road-relevant hybrid technology and instantly became an efficiency contest. Power units were no longer engines but energy systems combining turbo, battery, and recovery motors. Mercedes cracked the code first and dominated through integration and reliability. Cars grew longer, heavier, and aerodynamically sensitive, making following difficult. Drivers had to think like engineers, managing harvest modes and temperature maps while racing wheel to wheel. The era redefined what driver skill meant. Part racer, part energy manager, part software operator. 2022 to 2025. Modern ground effect cars. Formula One returned to ground effect with a modern twist to fix dirty air. Simplified wings and sculpted floors were designed to let cars follow closely and revive real overtaking. The machines looked cleaner, but were incredibly complex underneath, sensitive to ride height and stiff suspensions. Porpoising returned as an old enemy in new clothes. Budget caps reshaped team politics, rewarding efficiency over endless spending. This era blends spectacle with sustainability, aiming to keep the sport fast while making competition fairer and more human again. 2026, Active Aero era. Formula One's 2026 regulations bring some of the biggest changes in years. The cars will be shorter, narrower, and lighter, paired with heavily revised aerodynamic packages. A major headline feature is Active Aero, giving drivers the ability to adjust wing angles on the fly for improved efficiency and performance. There's also a major power unit shift, moving toward a 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and electric power. With pre-season testing already underway, it's still too early to know exactly how these changes will shake things up, but it's going to be exciting to see how it all unfolds.